Hello everyone, and welcome to our fourth and final webinar of the Museum on Main Street program and the MuseWeb Foundation. This webinar will be covering the sharing, promotion, and the ripple effect of your cultural storytelling projects in your communities. I am Selwyn Remp, the project director for MuseWeb, and with me today is Heather Shelton, our digital curator. Last webinars we covered cultural storytelling, what makes a good story, platforms for posting, Creative Commons use, and free software and tools to be able to record and edit your stories. These previous webinars, you can find the slides of the video versions on our MuseWeb's YouTube or on our SlideShare. Really today we're talking about I've created and edited my cultural stories. So now what do I do with it? Before we dive in too deeply, I would like to talk quickly about the idea that good content always outlives technology, sometimes quite a long time. Some of you guys might remember these. I certainly don't use them anymore on a daily basis, and the technology of a typewriter is certainly not something that is commonly used by school-going kids at this point. How many of you guys use the feather and ink at this point? Writing it, handwriting, sure. We may still use our ballpoints in a form of this feather and ink, but I find myself actually not even handwriting that much anymore. Even though I still write things, I do it digitally, either on my phone, on my computer. I don't find myself using pen and paper, and so the technology of pen and paper is even starting to get outdated. But to really demonstrate how good quality content outlives technology, I just wanted to bring in the Rosetta Stone. The text on this stone was written in 196 before Common Age, and the stone was found back in 1799. Heather, can you help me out here for a moment? Can you please just read this for me?
There is no way for me to read that, Selwyn.
Can you read this?
Yeah, that makes more sense.
Just proving that the text on that stone, the way it was written in 196 before Common Age, is no longer really being used, but the information on it is still being transferred. The content, we can still find ways to use contemporary technology to read it. To think about this, I just want to point out, first, make sure your content is accessible in a variety of ways to a variety of users. Consider your audience or your prospective audience. In fact, the Rosetta Stone had 3 different languages that were all 3 common at that point, written on it, just to ensure that people could use and read the stone at that point in time. Now, I'm not advocating here to start writing every piece of oral history or every piece of cultural story that you have in 3 different languages, but think about how who is your audience and what technology and what language do they use to convey or to listen to your stories. Try to use it in a variety of ways. Try to use your oral histories, your cultural stories, both digitally but in the physical environment as well. Try having them with you in a local museum or around you in the neighborhood. In ways, the digital world and the physical environment are already 2 different languages, if you will. As the Rosetta Stone used 3 different languages in the same stone, we have the option to use the digital world as kind of augmenting the physical reality. Use content to market for your organization of community. You can play small pieces of your cultural story that you've recorded and have that be available kind of as a trigger for people to find where the entire length interview or the entire video is located. You don't always have to use the complete story, because people this day and age do not necessarily have the time or don't want to make the time to listen to your stories at the moment they come across. They have 1 or 2 seconds. If lucky, they have a couple of minutes to think, is this something I want to spend more time into listening or not? And really, you want to use a soundbite to be able to lead people back to, they've decided they want to spend more time with your cultural stories, and then they will create more time to listen to it. And last, I do want to argue, again, it builds on that virtual versus physical. If you have the possibility to locate your cultural stories around town in a local library, perhaps even in a restaurant. Connect them to online, to where people can find out more about the project or can find the whole story if you only have a one-sentence line that can fit on the wall in the restaurant or a cafe.
So in our last webinar, we talked a good bit about posting your stories online, archiving those stories for future generations and for you to retrieve later on. We talked about YouTube, we talked about SoundCloud, we talked about the Museum on Main Street website, and we talked about a platform called Internet Archive. These are platforms where you can post your content and retrieve that content fairly easily, whether you're talking about audio or video or a combination of audio, video, text, and anything else, even photos. So these are places where your content will sort of live online for any given amount of time, for as long as those platforms are around. So consider these platforms your online libraries. What's next after posting online? What do we do with our content? It's time to promote and share that content. There are millions of ways to promote and share content online now. Social media has made it possible for us to really dive into a number of possibilities for audio, for video, for photos, and for a variety of other types of assets. So we're going to talk a little bit about promoting and sharing your online content, because ultimately, if your stories are never heard or shared, were they told in the first place? And we like to provide the example of everyone sitting around the fire. So go back many, many generations to a time before people had even settled in community. And think about if people hadn't actually heard those stories, if they hadn't heard the fairy tales, they hadn't heard the tales of danger and adventure, how would they convey to the next generation? So social media and the digital sphere in some ways is akin to that fire chat, that circle that we are so used to, conveying those stories from one generation to the other. So our ultimate goal is to make sure that your oral histories, your videos, your audio are seen by not only local people, but people around the world. So I want to take a few minutes to talk about marketing and promotion versus archiving, which is, again, the topic of one of our previous webinars. Some sites like YouTube can not only help you archive your story, but they do have the built-in commenting and social sharing capabilities that we're so used to in social media. So a site like YouTube and SoundCloud as well not only allows you to post your story and include a lot of very descriptive text that enables a pretty solid search, but it also enables you to comment and to share those particular stories. So SoundCloud and YouTube are great for promotion and archiving. So two platforms not to miss. Other platforms that you're probably familiar with on social media are purely for social promotion, because it's not necessarily intuitive how to retrieve or even search for a particular topic later on. And if you are familiar with Facebook, Twitter, or Tumblr, these are platforms that sort of live in the moment. So imagine your Facebook feed, and you check your Facebook feed a couple times a day, and you see the stories that are being posted right at that instant. But you may not be able to go back and find stories that were posted the previous day. Imagine trying to find a story that was posted in the previous year. So these platforms are not necessarily built for archiving. They're meant for social promotion. Now, Facebook does have a feature called Memories, and you might see this in your feed from time to time where it says on this day, and it shows a picture of something that you posted on a particular day. It makes you feel like Facebook is more of a library or an archival website, but ultimately, it's really not archiving your content in a way a traditional library website or database would be archiving your content that's openly accessible to you in a search. So think of Twitter, Tumblr, and Facebook as the promotional side, YouTube and SoundCloud more of a sort of a hybrid of both of those types of assets. So using social media, boy, this is a webinar on all in its own. There are many, many tricks and trades for maximizing your content on social media today, but there's no denying that these are still ideal places to share your stories with everyone. But you want to pick a platform that you're familiar to start with. So if you're on Facebook now, Facebook is probably the place that you want to start promoting your content. One thing you should certainly do is make sure that you have a complete profile describing you and your organization and its mission. Now, whether that is Facebook or Twitter or any other social media platform, you want to make sure that your profile or your picture or whatever it happens to be that describes you is a good representation for the project. In other words, if you are advocating student storytelling and you have a picture of yourself at a circus, you may or may not be connecting with the right type of message there. So make sure that your content and your story matches the person that you're trying to be, quote unquote, on social media. Now, when it comes to those followers, make sure that you tell your friends when and what you're sharing and ask them to share as well. The reshare, the reblog, the repost is gold in social media. You're looking for the ultimate type of engagement, which is somebody to take your content and value it so much that they want to share it with their own social media followers. But the point is, don't be shy about asking people to share your content. If you say, please reshare this, or we're trying to get the word out about our particular town, most people are inclined to share the content. And to that extent, you can call out certain people. Perhaps you want to tag somebody who actually helped with the creation of the video or the audio file. Maybe you want to make sure that that person has a little bit of a special thank you in your particular post by indicating that they were instrumental into having the content created. So tagging people or calling people out, particularly people who helped with your process, is a great way to get others involved because ultimately they will share those posts too. And again, don't be afraid to bring attention to this great content. If you have a story that's worth sharing, make sure you tell people that in the post. Saying something like, this is the most amazing story you're going to hear all day, is a great way of getting people to click on your content. And most importantly, I saved this one for last, let students spread the word on the social platforms that they use. There is sort of a generational divide on the platforms that are being used by different types of age groups. So Facebook, of course, is the most ubiquitous, and it is used by literally millions of people, maybe billions, I think, at this stage worldwide. And the distribution of platform use among ages is varied from there. Students in your classes may be using Snapchat, or they're using other platforms that perhaps older generations are not using. So let students spread the word on the platforms that they use. So if they're the most interested and the most engaged in Instagram and you're not using Instagram, then let them spread the word about their projects using the platforms that they have their friends on. This is a great way of diversifying your social media content. So what are strategies for great posts? Again, people spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to engage with people online, how to make posts click-worthy, how to create the content that goes viral. And in some ways, some of these elements are going to seem like common sense. I mean, one thing you can do is to try to tie into current events that are trending. Whether that current event deals with a political issue, deals with an issue that is relevant to your town, let's say water quality, if you're working with the Waterways exhibit, or perhaps you're working with a hometown teams exhibit and the 100th anniversary of a local baseball team is coming up. You want to tie into those larger trends because ultimately you'll find that in small and large communities alike, people are going to be talking about those no matter what. They're already going to be talking about those, and chances are local press outlets are also going to be talking about those topics. So tying it in makes it seem relevant and timely. Another thing I like to incorporate when in social media posts is using the awe factor. So who can not like a picture of a cute cuddly puppy or a picture of a baby that appears in your Facebook feed? So the awe factor is something that elicits an emotional response. And ultimately, the types of posts that really do become viral and multiple platforms are those that get people to smile, or they get people to cry. And these are the posts that have the most emotional response for your followers. Doing something amazing. Let's say you have collected 30 stories in your small community, and as a result of working on this project, 2 people connected who had not seen each other for many years. And maybe one person was a distant relative of the person working on the project. So those amazing things that might result from having this project in your community are definitely things that you want to cite in your social media content, and certainly point out to press outlets that are local in your community. Making your post quirky is also a great way of getting people to click on your content and listen to your story. So maybe there's something really strange and odd but wonderful about your town. Creating that sense of interest and quirkiness is really something that works in a social media post. A local diner serves up a crunchy insect feast. Well, you would have to click on that, right? You'd want to find out, A, is it true? And B, are they really serving insects at a local diner? So if there is something interesting and sort of off the beaten path with your town or community, definitely feature that in your social media content. Bragging on your town. Everybody wants to live in the coolest place. Everybody wants to live in the most beautiful place, the most engaging place, etc. But we all like to brag on the places that we live. So if you have something exemplary or something superlative about your community, talk about it. Maybe you have the cleanest water in the country. Maybe you have the highest mountain in the state, or maybe you have the biggest cow that was ever recorded at a state fair. Whatever it is, people will support that, particularly those people that are in your town. So make sure when you're referencing a town, the one thing that you always want to do consistently is to tag that town in your post. So if you're writing from Cozad, Nebraska, make sure you put Cozad, Nebraska as a hashtag in your post. We're going to talk a little bit more about hashtags later on. The believe it or not factor. If something's unbelievable, just like it was quirky, that's also something that piques people's interest. So believe it or not, in this case, the smallest animal in the world lives here. Most people would read that and think, well, what is the smallest animal in the world? And they would click that immediately. So again, pulling out the unbelievable, the quirky about your town is one way to create more engaging posts. Ask questions of your followers, particularly on Twitter, which is more of a sort of open dialogue. Tumblr also falls into that category. But perhaps you want to talk about an issue that has come up in your town. Again, with waterways, there are myriad things that you can talk about. But this is a way of connecting people with local topics that are of importance to your community. And it's also a way of sort of taking a stand on issues that you believe in. So for example, with water quality or another topic about local pollution or something like that, you might say, what is your stance on? We're eliciting ideas, etc. So asking people their opinions is a great way of creating engagement for your posts. No matter what you do, make sure you use hashtags that relate to storytelling and the Be Here Main Street or other storytelling projects. Hashtags are ways that people can sort of search for your content and group all your content together. So they're really critical in creating sort of a breadcrumb trail for people to find your content later on. Hashtags are simply ways to categorize your posts. They're search terms. So if you're familiar with Google search or Bing search or any of the other major browsers, when you're looking for something, you simply type in what you want to know. Say you're looking for something about tigers of Asia. Well, tigers of Asia could just as easily be a hashtag. The difference is when you're using hashtags, there's sort of a nomenclature or a series of rules that you have to follow. First and foremost, you need to use the pound symbol or the number sign before your hashtag. And you don't separate your letters. Your letters are all together in one string. To make it easier for people to read, you might consider capitalizing the letters of the first word or the second word in that particular string. So examples that I've used: Tuesday motivation. If you had it all as a single series, it might be tough to read. So I've capitalized Tuesday And I've capitalized motivation for it to be a little bit more legible for people who are reading through long feeds. Search for hashtags that have already been used if you want to join an existing conversation. So for example, with waterways, people have used the hashtag #ThinkWater. So using hashtags that already are in existence for similar conversations is a great way of simply adding your message to a larger conversation. On the other hand, you want to make sure that when you're looking for hashtags, you don't create or join a conversation that has unintended implications. So don't fall victim to funny hashtag letter mashups. And you may have heard of this example before, but the British singer that was popular a few years ago, Susan Boyle, released an album. It was poised to be a very, very popular album, but her hashtag on Twitter really didn't work out the way she wanted it to. So when you string all of those letters together, they can read in very, very different ways and have very unintended consequences. Think about that. Make sure that your hashtag is exactly the way you want it to be. In other words, you're not sending people to a list of totally irrelevant topics that you've unintentionally gotten involved with a conversation that you're not prepared to finish off, so to speak. But in this case, you can join the Be Here Main Street hashtag or the #ThinkWater hashtag and already be part of that additional conversation. There are many sources out there for using hashtags properly, but they're very important in getting your content seen in a sea, literally, of social media posts.
So one more question, actually. Could I join a conversation if I'm worried about word mashups? Can I simply use capitalization to make sure that doesn't happen?
That's a great way of doing it. And I would just advise researching that hashtag before you're even thinking about how to format the hashtag in your post. So it's a great way to sort of step outside the conversation before you start posting your content, is to do just what I call a little bit of hashtag research. But once you've decided on a hashtag, using those capital letters will help differentiate the meaning of the hashtag.
Will that separate me from other uses of that same hashtag without capitals?
Not really, and that's a great question, because ultimately the hashtag can get sort of recast depending on who's using it in their post. So one person might capitalize it, but another person, say, is on their mobile phone and really doesn't want to spend the energy to push shift and the letter to capitalize those words, so that ultimately he or she just writes the words or the letters in lowercase. So you really want to be mindful of that, knowing that anybody out there has the power to reinvent that hashtag. And write it however they want to, whether it's with capitals or without. So in this slide, we're gonna talk a little bit about sample posts, and it's always helpful to see some posts that have come out there to get an example of not only what you can do, but to think about the content as well as the imagery that accompanies the content. Posts with images do infinitely better on all social media platforms than posts without. And just think about it, in your long feed, in your Facebook feed or your Twitter feeds, when you see a compelling photo, you're more inclined to stop and read the words. So in this case, in the left example, we pulled a great public domain photo from the New York Public Library. Showing immigrants coming to Ellis Island, and paired it with content that was relevant to that particular week. There was a lot of hot topics, a lot of hot discussion about immigration the week that this post went out there, and therefore it garnered a lot of interest, a lot of engagement. So when you're talking about content that's sort of already in conversation on whatever social media platform you're using, you're immediately jumping in to a larger discussion, which is one way to keep your content timely and relevant. Now on the right is sort of an example of an all post, and you really did have to listen to the story to know why the story elicited that sort of awe response. But ultimately, again, using hashtags like Be Here Main Street and storytelling and our collective organizational hashtag, which was MuseWeb, we tried to bring in followers of these particular hashtags and anyone who was interested in storytelling. So that particular post was also quite popular because the content behind the scenes was really good. A couple of additional sample posts. If you want to sort of create a visual of a quote that has been uttered in your audio story or your video story, that's a great way of giving people sort of a snippet of what they can hear or watch in your oral history. So in this case, we've not only provided the quote in the photo, but also asked sort of a provocative question. Could you leave it all behind? And in this case, the story was about a 19th century immigrant who left Germany and never saw his family again. So something that we hoped people would sort of pause and think about. Again, a very relevant topic at that time. It was a part of a whole series of posts about coming to the United States in the 19th century and general immigration. So you'll notice in this post, we've also referenced our partners at Museum on Main Street. So if you're looking to get someone's attention, if you're trying to get them to share that content, a great way of doing so is to tag them. And the way you do that in multiple platforms is to use the @ symbol and then write the name of the organization. And it should auto-populate the live link to that person or that organization's page. So a great way of just getting people in on a conversation that you ultimately want them to share or to like. And finally, in the right example here, we have a fun picture, a sort of patriotic picture that supports a story about 4th of July parades. So this is a Be Here Main Street story that also had a good amount of play on social media. But not only does it talk about the subject of the story, it also gives people a small introduction to the project. And particularly if you're starting from scratch, it's a great way of sort of orienting your followers as to what you're trying to do. So if you have a particular name for your project or you want to talk to people, your followers, about your collaboration with the Smithsonian Initiative, it's a nice way to give them a bit of context about the project that you're working on. And as I mentioned before, going visual is an imperative in social media. You really want to provide your followers with the highest quality pictures you possibly can. So you definitely want to be mindful. You don't want to provide pictures that A, are not owned by you and that you don't have permission to use. But B, you don't want to provide pictures that are pixelated, or maybe they're too dark, or they really don't allow people to connect with your story. So having the right photo is a fantastic way of really creating engagement with your posts. If you don't have a great camera, if you're not a photographer, ask a student or a local photographer to document your process or the locations in your stories. So one thing that we always like to see in social media are people engaged with the process of storytelling. So maybe you have somebody take a picture of the students doing research, or take a picture of students interviewing particular subjects in your community. Showing that process is great for long-term archiving too, because it does document the steps that you took and the whole process of collecting the story, thinking about the story, editing the story, etc. So the point here being documentation is critical, but having a local student or photographer help you is one way of ensuring that your photos are high quality. I mentioned before that social media posts with compelling images generate much more interest than those without. So spend the time to build what I would call a cache of great photos. So if your stories are about local waterways, get out there on a Saturday afternoon and take great pictures of your local waterways, anything that's represented in your story, whether it is a river or a lake, or perhaps it's a baseball field, or local buildings or local businesses. But having a cache of those images at the ready gives you that much more ammunition to create terrific social media posts. And finally, studies have shown that pictures of people often lead to more engagement than pictures that don't have people. So showing the photos of the students involved in the project, showing the photos of the people who are being interviewed is a great way of connecting with real people. It's not stock photography. It's not simple landscape imagery. It's real people who are involved in your project and had a hand in its creation. So that sort of documentation really helps drive engagement on multiple platforms across social media. Thinking about engagement, what about audience and the timing of your posts? Your audience is really critical because you're sort of having to ask yourself, who does this story appeal to? Are there people in my list of followers who would enjoy this story, or do I need to reach out to people outside of the network and call attention to them, or say, hey, so-and-so at a local news outlet, we've got this great story that you want to follow up on. Think about your audience. If you're on Facebook as a personal user and don't have an organizational account, you want to think who in your list of followers or your friends is most inclined to care about this, and can you reach out to that person? If you don't have those people in your existing network, think about following local historical societies or your local library and reach out to them to say, hey, check out these student videos about our favorite historic tavern, etc., whatever your story happens to be about. There's never any harm in bringing good content to the attention of people who care about it. You also want to think about timing. So for example, if you're interested in sharing with other students or teachers, post outside of school hours or post stories to coincide with school events. For example, if your community is hosting the Hometown Teens exhibition, perhaps you have a story about a football game and you want to post it right before the big game on Friday night. So again, that's sort of a combination of posting content that is not only relevant, but it's timely to events that are happening in your town.
Heather, I actually have a quick question before we go on. If I have multiple social media accounts for my organization, can I just copy and paste some of these slides or some of these stories or social media posts and use them across different platforms? I would assume that I have the same audience on each of the social media accounts.
That's a good question. The answer to that is complicated, but I will say that you probably don't have the same audiences on different platforms. Chances are your audience might be a little different on each of those platforms, and as such, your content should also be a bit different on each of those platforms. While it's very tempting to copy your Facebook post and to put it into other places, doing that actually doesn't work as well as you might think it does. Other platforms tend to truncate posts. They cut off your wording right in the middle. If there are character limits on Twitter, for example, you couldn't post a Facebook message that was any longer than 140 characters on Twitter. So you have to think about the rules for each of those platforms. Some platforms allow you to get into great detail about your content. Pinterest and obviously Tumblr are more of a microblog that allows more words rather than a platform like Twitter. But each of those has a sort of style that works the best as far as propagating the content. And I would advise taking the same content and reorganizing the wording so that it works the best on each of those platforms. Instagram is a great platform. It allows you to really get into a lot of details about your content, but it doesn't necessarily allow you to post links to that content. So again, another limitation that forces you to be creative in how you're posting your story. In that context, you would probably want to put your link in the profile, your organizational profile or your personal profile that allows people to click from there. But the answer to your question is that different platforms call for different strategies.
And so you're saying I should consider my content and not just copy and paste, but actually spend some time on each of the platforms, decide which one I should use, and kind of craft some content for each of them.
When it comes to scheduling, scheduling is a great idea because it does allow you to post when your people are online. So if your people are going to be online at the time of the football game, but perhaps you actually want to sit and enjoy the game and not think about crafting social media posts, you can schedule posts in advance. Many platforms allow you to do that. Facebook is a great example of a platform that allows you to create content and to post it well in advance of the current time. So you can create one or you can create multiple posts to go out in a blast that would really serve your audience and the times that they're online. And this is just a sample of what you would see on your Facebook post when you're ready to schedule that content. So you would go ahead and type in the words, and as you get ready to click publish, you use the arrow to scroll down to the word schedule. And again, you can schedule that post to go out during the evening if you're not online, or even on the weekend. So you want to use this feature so that you can post when your audience is online, and that will really help you grab and garner engagement in a way that you couldn't otherwise, even if that means posting at night or on the weekends. Other platforms that are out there that allow you to post content ahead of time are social media management platforms like Hootsuite and TweetDeck. Those are both available for free, although they have paid versions which are much more robust. The free versions do allow you to schedule other types of posts in advance, such as Twitter posts, and we use TweetDeck. I have also used Hootsuite, and both are good in allowing you to not only create content, but also follow streams of additional content that you're looking to learn about, whether that's all the Be Here Main Street posts that have come out, or maybe you're just interested in searching for posts that are tagged with your community name. Those social media management tools, if you're really getting into marketing and promotion, become essential as a way of organizing and sort of seeing the bigger picture of what's being said about your content. So what are short links and QR codes? If you noticed in some of those sample posts that we put up there, there were some odd links that did not start with www, whatever the URL ends up being. And as you know, from searching on the internet, HTML links, URLs can be very, very long, and you certainly don't want to include that in a Twitter post, or particularly in print publications. It's just too long and it's not memorable. So there are ways to simplify your links, and whether it's Google or a service called Bitly, you can simply sign up again for a free account and enter the full-length URL, and it spits out a short version of that, which in turn can actually be customized so that it does become memorable. And I use this particular service in Twitter quite a bit, because not only does it truncate the link, it also allows you behind the scenes to track how many people have clicked on that link. So if you're really interested in gauging how many people have listened to your stories, that's a terrific way of keeping track of those metrics. Now, for print purposes, this is also a great thing to keep in mind, because when you're printing content about your town or community, again, you want that link to be memorable, and that's something somebody can come back to later on and remember. So having a URL shortener is a great way of ensuring that people can recall the link that you've printed on your collateral materials, whether they're rack cards or postcards or anything else.
Short URLs or short links, the way Heather just explained them, are used online. You can also use them in print, or do something a little more visual, something like a QR code, which is like a barcode, as you can see here on the right-hand side on the screen. There's various uses and various questions whether they are really popular or not, but they allow you to use a very small space on a visual, in a physical environment, to place this that will directly link it to a website or digital content. Depending on the platform you use, sometimes you need an app to download it to go directly to a website, or some of the cultural storytelling platforms actually have QR codes systems embedded in them, so that when you scan it, it goes directly to the story that you've uploaded. People go back and forth on the use of QR codes, because now you don't just have a website link, which we're all familiar with, but you also have to have either an app to scan it. It's not something that is easily duplicatable. If you are on the phone and you want to quickly send a message to or call someone about it, but it's easy to take a picture of and look up later. I would argue if you use this physically in a physical environment in print, always combine it with the actual website link if you can, or with a shortened URL. So you give people the option to use either. It allows you to place either on flyers or embed them in signage on the roadside. Make sure that the physical environment has a link to this digital world. And so I very much want to say, even though we've been talking about the digital environment this whole time, I want to say for local promotion, get physical. Make sure your community knows about what you're doing. The best way, and it's very similar to what Heather was talking about in terms of social media, but identify 2 or 3 amazing things that happened as a result of this project. Tell people about it. Inform your local press outlets. Create a sample press package if you can. We have some samples like that on our website as well. Anyone you mentioned or cited in a story, just send them a quick message like, hey, listen, I've added you to the story. It's being promoted right now. They may in turn say, oh, I want to share that, because they're in there themselves, and they will share it with their friends, family, and constituents. Other options to really get physical in your community with your cultural storytelling is you could host something like film or audio story screening at the town square, library, or even at the high school. You can print the flyers around the event and post in store windows, promote it on social media. All the kind of things we're familiar with in the cultural world with physical exhibitions. You can very much do that even though your content, your cultural stories may not be physical and they are actually a screen or an online webpage. You could even host something like your own version of the Oscars in town. Present perhaps donated awards. It's a great way to invite local businesses or politicians to donate something. And make sure that if you bring a group like this together, don't just promote the actual content, the actual stories, and the actual website or audio recordings or videos that you created. Make sure you also promote the actual event once it's happening. Take a group picture of all the storytellers. Share to social media that you're in the town square right now. Send that to local news outlet, because that might create a second wave of people who may not have heard about your event, but now want to find out about your cultural stories. Because ultimately, the thing you want to aim for is that your cultural stories get listened to, because the value of the stories is actually in their use. There's too often that stories get recorded, they're tucked away, and 30 years later, no one remembers them anymore, because no one really listened to them after they were recorded. And that's the core of this webinar and why we talk about promotion and social media. It's all tools to make sure that people listen to it. You guys will know certainly better than we do what the tools are available to you in your own community or in your own state. Think beyond just your community. The more you share them, the more you can make sure that they're available to everyone. Again, to be able to make sure that your community is involved in the cultural storytelling, the first step I would do is ask around. Ask your local restaurants, businesses to support the project, and not even support financially, but as simple as posting tent cards or flyers at the cash register with a link or that pesky QR code again. Think about places that people regularly visit. Ask storytellers, the storytellers that you used in your cultural storytelling project. Ask them where they work, where they visit, or even workshop. Could these locations host a meeting, post a flyer, cards, perhaps share your stories as part of a program. It's giving them ideas of how to use the cultural stories that you created. And I would always go back, and we do this very much. You see this webinar as well. We use very striking images, or we try to use. Always try to come up with a fun design. Try to create pro-quality print materials like window decals or flyers. And there is a variety of easy print tools like Vistaprint or that can really, Moo.com I should say, that really can help you come up with a fun design very easily and at a very low cost. I'd also say check out just MuseWeb.us, our website. We have a whole list of resources and ideas. So you can certainly just take some of the ideas, run with it, and make it your own. And then going back to that getting physical in your community, if you have the possibility to place a sticker, a stoop tile, or even erecting a plaque with information about the research you discovered or about the story that happened there. Think about things like, on this spot in 1936, something amazing happened. And I'm skipping out on some ideas here, but Heather gave you some great examples earlier. Social media style content that you're using, you often can use in the physical environment as well. That would be as far as promotion, but you want to make sure that things stay around. You want to make sure that they last. So think about archiving locally. Of course, in a previous webinar, we also mentioned the national programs, and the Stories from Main Street website are great. But also think about what you can do in your local community or state. And I would start with creating a 1- or 2-page document to really just explain what you did and who the storytellers were, what the year, the county, etc. Something easy you can hand to people and leave behind. Then go ahead and contact your local library, museum, historical society. Perhaps you're already collaborating or you're from one of these. Then it's even easier to get the in, but inform them about your project and see if they can help you with contacting, or see if they can help you with archiving and safeguarding the information that you discovered and the information you recorded, the cultural stories that you created. Once you've contacted your local library or museum and or historical society, certainly see if there's a state library or university archives nearby that may have collections about regional history and county history. Now this will depend from state to state, city to city, town to town, what the exact resources are. So I'm being a little general on purpose because I don't know what exactly your local circumstances are. But the key is, if there is a collecting agency collecting local regional history or county history, chances are that they will be happy for new projects about local and regional history to enter into their collections as well. The ask ultimately would be, is one, of course, seeing if they can help you find a place to archive your information and your cultural stories. And ultimately, you may want to ask if some of these organizations are able to accession the collection of stories based on the topic or region that you worked on, and see if there is a way to, not just nationally at the Smithsonian or online at YouTube, but see if there's a local physical environment where people can come to find out about the regional cultural history, and see if your cultural stories can be added to that collection as well, based on the topic that you've decided to research and collect. So ultimately what you want to do is aim to connect with as many people as you know, and see if they can connect with their friends and their family and their colleagues at work, and start building a network in your community that all knows about your cultural story and your cultural story project. Because the more your stories get shared, the more people get together and realize this is some important work to do, and they may want to give it legacy or a future. And that's when we get to the true ripple effect. We've done this one-time program right now with collecting the stories, publishing online. We've done some sharing. Let's hope we're going to get to the point where, hey, we've done some promotion. We've had really exciting programming around it. Some people know about it. So now let's think about the road ahead for a moment and think about evaluating what worked well in this program and what we could do different next time. As mentioned in the slide, make sure you continue using the content, the cultural stories for promotion and marketing, because ultimately the continued use will ensure the longevity of the content. Once you're working on that aspect, you start thinking about what we can need to repeat this, if you're in a position to do so. And if you're not in a position to repeat the oral histories, perhaps on a different subject, you need funding to be able to support a program like this. Make sure there's a legacy to it. Start creating your requests for future funding, or start fitting it into your general operating if you're from an organization that does cultural storytelling or wants to do it. If you're a volunteer or a student, there's no reason you cannot continue working on a project like this. The skills we have shown you in the last couple of webinars are universally transferable and can work with any subject that you would choose. That would ultimately lead to repeat, repeat, repeat. There is so much cultural history around us and so few people that are actually recording it. But once it's recorded, the group of people interested in listening to it and sharing it is suddenly a lot larger. But there's only a small group that has the skills and the resources to record these things. To help that along in the future, I would say always check back at the Museums on Main Street website and the MuseWeb website. We will continue sharing resources for free to update if there's any new technologies coming out there. But we hope that the last couple of webinars, the programming through Museum on Main Street, have helped you to create a sustainable possibility, help you open up the idea of starting to do or being able to do more of these cultural storytelling projects together with students, with adults, volunteers, and perhaps even start working it into museum or libraries staffing, or perhaps historical society staffing, to be able to make storytelling really part of your community and treasure the value of your community. So if there are any questions, I would love to hear them at this point, or email us. Our email addresses are listed. Again, my name was Selwyn Ram. I was joined here by Heather Shelton today, and we are part of a 3-team from MuseWeb, and we are doing this in combination, in partnership with the Smithsonian Traveling Exhibition Services Museum on Main Street program.